we're going to talk a little bit about strength and connection, and I have a lot of really good discussion questions for us today. So I'm very much looking forward to getting started. So let's go ahead and get started. So you may or may not be new to the mental wellness chat, but I always like to thank our sponsor, Beatrice, for their sponsor of the mental wellness chat. If you have been on here before, you've heard me talk about that we've been doing this chat for, for 3 years. It's actually almost been like it's 4.5 years, actually. I've just really just been very engrossed in the mental wellness chat and what we've been doing and so present with it that I did not realize we've been doing it as long. I've just enjoyed every month that we've done. So we're going to talk about part one. We're going to talk about why is social support so important. And it's important because social support is really like a mental wellness superpower. And we also want to, today we're going to talk a little bit about how to strengthen bonds and how to also find your tribe, because that's a hard thing to do. How do you find support and how do you find resources? So part one, we're going to talk about the power of social support. We're going to move on to our next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about why social support is essential for mental wellness. But before we do that, I want to ask you a question. So can you think of a time when social support has helped you through a difficult situation? And what support, what type of support, what about it made it meaningful to you? And I'm going to get us started. So this is just a time thinking about reflecting on a time that social support helped you. We also have Barbara here. Hi, Barbara. It's so good to see you. So I'll get us started. So when I had to make a treatment change many years ago, social support was really helpful for me. So with that said, that was people that I knew that had MS as well that had made a treatment change. Consulting with them, that really gave me some reassurance on questions that I had. And my family and friends understanding the levity of making that decision and what it meant to me really helped. And it really got me through kind of a difficult time. So let's see. I know it's kind of a deep question, so we'll leave it. I'm going to let people continue to type because I know it's a little bit more than a yes or no. But can you think, and you can say yes or no, actually. Can you think of a time where having social support helped you through a difficult situation? And it doesn't have to be about MS. It can be about anything else. And what made that support meaningful to you? So Julie says, yes, the feedback of other people with MS on a Facebook group is great. You can ask questions that others can answer. And then Julie says, I go every Thursday to Downey's support group. All right, so we're going to move on to our next slide, but you can keep typing. I know that's a long question. But why is social support essential for mental wellness? It's impossible to have emotional wellness and not have social support included. You know, we're all human and we're wired for connection. So social support really is what links us to emotional resilience. Loneliness has been linked to increased stress, depression, and even physical health risks. If you've ever dealt with loneliness, you would understand what I'm saying, that, you know, when you're lonely, you generally don't feel emotionally well. And social support can help buffer stress. It can enhance your mood. It can actually improve your overall mental health and well-being. We're going to, not all relationships are healthy, and we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries and how to deepen relationships, etc. But it's important to know that your social support is a part of your emotional wellness. Now, I don't want you to compare yourself to other people that you know. I'll give you a great example. I have lots of people in the world of helping and that I've worked with over the years, and really people can have really big support networks, and that's beautiful. I've always had a really small support network, and that might feel ironic because I'm a helping professional, but my support network is kind of small. So so don't compare yourself to anyone else, and just know that, you know, this is something that we can that we can build on as well. So Katrina says what's been helpful for her is when other people are listening, not judging. That is really a great thing to have. And Joe says, does Facebook groups count? Absolutely. We're going to talk about Facebook and other support group. Even this is technically a psychoeducational support group, but it's a support group too, to some degree. Barbara says, yes, I was a caretaker for my mom until she passed away. Having someone to speak to going through a challenging time while dealing with a chronic illness did help. So having someone to talk to. And then Lori says, recent therapy change as well. I was nervous about possible side effects, but I knew other people with MS or knew someone else with MS that had the same therapy. So I reached out to see what his experience was. It eased the stress knowing someone had very minimal issues. So we'll move on to our next slide. And we're going to talk a little bit about the science behind connection, because believe it or not, there is science behind the connection. So well, actually, I'll ask a question. What neurotransmitter is activated when you hug someone? Or if you pet a baby, or if you if you hold a baby or pet an animal. Sorry, pet an animal. Don't pet a baby. Let's see. Okay, we got some dopamine here. So you probably get a little bit of dopamine. See if anyone else has a guess. It is, and serotonin, you probably get a little bit, it's oxytocin. So oxytocin, the brain releases oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, when we experience meaningful social interactions. And really research and studies show that strong social networks correlate with lower levels of cortisol, so lower levels of your stress hormone. And social supports can enhance neuroplasticity, helping the brain to adapt to stress and to challenges. And so, as you know it, so I want you to think is socialization, social supports specifically, it can be something that's healthy for you. It's a part of your overall wellness. Now, if you are an introverted person and you're not someone who's very social, that is not the same thing as getting social support. Being introverted is how you collect your energy back at the end of the day, or recharge yourself, but we all need connection to some degree. Julie said, I am in year 30 of her MS and has been in the Detroit area support group since 1998. We have a Zoom meeting every Friday and monthly luncheons. We even have a member who lives in England and another in New Hampshire. It's great checking on current MS trials and just seeing how everyone is doing. And if I'm not mistaken, Julie is in California, so that's a really good example. Julie, if I'm right that you're the one from California, let me know. But she attends a group in Detroit that's based out of Detroit via Facebook, so that's just a really great example. So we're going to move on to our next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about the link between social support and physical health. So we talked about the link between a little bit what happens to you from a neurotransmitter standpoint. But people with strong social ties have lower risks of heart disease, high blood pressure, and weakened immune function. Now, that doesn't mean that having social support will take away having MS. Absolutely not. It just means that it will help your overall quality of life. And supportive relationships encourage healthy behaviors such as exercise, nutrition, medical adherence. So thinking about how when you feel connected to other people, when you feel connected in general, how that helps you when you're working towards your goals or your overall wellness. And even social engagement and connections can increase your lifespan. And that is, one of the things that we, I'm sorry, I was wrong, Julie. This is Julie from Michigan. Sorry, Julie. Kenneth asks, has neuroplasticity been shown to increase brain function on SPECT? I am not sure what SPECT is, but I do know that neuroplasticity would definitely show an increase in your ability to do things differently, which would be probably an increase in brain function to some degree. But that sounds like a more medical question. And Julie from California says, I'm in California and we go live and have Zoom. So that's good to know that California and Michigan both have groups. So there's a link between our physical well-being and also our social support. Now let's talk about some of the emotional benefits of a strong social support. And Bruce says, I facilitate 5 support groups during COVID, ran 5 a week because depression for MS. One of the things to reduce depression is social, and that is very true. One of the things that you can do, to reduce depression is have interactions with other people, and support groups are definitely one of those ways. So we'll move on to our next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about the emotional benefits of having a social circle. So when you have a strong social circle, you have a sense of belonging and purpose. It can reduce feelings of isolation and loneliness, and it encourages emotional validation and positive reinforcement. So emotionally, physically, we generally feel better when we have a social support. So now let's talk about social support and stress management. We'll move on to our next slide. So you heard a little bit before that if you have a strong social support, that it can reduce stress, helping us to kind of talk through our problems, helping us process our challenges and regulate emotions during difficult times. This, when you have a good support network, this is increased. And when you can talk through problems with trusted people, it reduces the mental burden of having to carry it by yourself. For example, my son is almost an adult, and I was talking with a good friend today about just some general anxiety, just about college coming up and just transitions. Many of you may have experienced it, and if you are a parent, one day you will experience probably this feeling. But it felt really, really good just to be able to connect and tell somebody, and I was able to take stuff I was feeling anxious about and transfer it to kind of a place of like, okay, I can set this down a little bit because I was able to process how I was feeling. And encouragement and reassurance from others can build resilience. Let me move we'll move on to our next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about strengthening your bonds and building your support systems. And we'll move to the next slide. So quality over quantity, the importance of deep connections. I'm going to ask the group, and I'll have questions come up, but the questions are a little bit different than the written notes that I have. So they're kind of like surprises to me because I'm forgetting exactly where they're embedded in there. But how many of you have at least 1 or 2 deep connections in your life? And if you don't, I don't want you to feel bad or like anything's wrong with you. Okay, so Kenneth says yes. Krista says yes. I have definitely 2, but sometimes I've had to work on some of my relationships and connections too, to strengthen them. So we have Barbara, Lori, Helen. It's important to kind of think about who are your deep connections. Because we can have all sorts of different levels of friendships and different levels of socialization, right? And social connections. But the deep ones are the ones that are really important. Joe said, yes, my wife, my best friend. So it's important as we're going to talk a little bit too today about like cultivating these relationships, but it's really not about the number of friends you have, but really the meaningful connections that they are. And close, really authentic relationships provide better emotional support than really large, superficial networks. I've always said I'm a small group person because I think that the bigger the group gets, it's harder. I feel a little bit lost in a bigger group. And so I've always have had smaller connections. So John says, yes, a friend I've had since college for 30 years who is truly a brother to me. And Julie says, my husband and parents. Linda says, very few, my husband and sons. Krista says, it's better to have 4 quarters than 100 pennies. Absolutely. It's a great example. We'll move, so we're going to talk a little bit too about like tips to kind of, to deepen these relationships as well. So we're going to talk about different types of social support because again, 4 quarters is better than 100 pennies, but there's also different types of support. And this is important to know too, because we need to know what kind of support we might be looking for and being able to identify that. So there's emotional support. This is, somewhere you can get comfort, understanding, and reassurance. There's instrumental support. This is where you get practical help, such as like running errands or providing financial support or even advice. And that also falls in within informational support, advice, guidance, and resources. And then there's companionship support. Where sharing experiences and engaging in enjoyable activities together. So there's all sorts of different levels of support. And that's, when you're thinking and reflecting on, there might be people in your life that you can talk to about this if you needed to talk to about a stressor about this. But then if you needed advice, you might call this person. If you needed someone to help run an errand with you, you might pick this person. And that's why, because these are different levels of support. So I'm going to read a little bit. So Tina says her mom and her son are her supporters. Kenneth says, I have to supplement the real deep ones with the ones that have potential for going deeper so that you have a safety net for crisis. So, and that's important too, is that you're always kind of, looking at your support network and also having people that maybe that you don't know that well, that you might be cultivating into, to being friends, etc. We'll move on to our next one. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to strengthen relationships, but we're going to stop with a question. So it's like a surprise to me. How do you prefer to give and receive support? Emotionally, practically, or through companionship? So personally, I'll get us started so I can explain how to answer this. I like to give support probably in all 3 ways, depending on who I'm helping. But most of the time, I'm probably a toss between an emotional support and a practical supporter. Julie from Michigan says that she's blessed to have several. She's has a social group that's been around for 25 years, and they meet and for meals a few times a week. That's really cool. And her friends live out in Michigan, so these people are like chosen family. And she also has her friends that have autoimmune disease that she's known for 30 years. Some have MS and the other have another autoimmune enzyme issue. And all of us have brothers, and so they're just really close. So that's kind of how like a natural networks that you've kind of formed, which is really cool. So how do you prefer to give and receive support? So thinking about this, what would your answers be? So I like to help people on the emotional aspect, but I do like the practical help too. I like to be able to kind of insert myself and be able to help with something that I know that that might help. Tina says potentially all of the above. Katrina says all the above. Different friends, families offer different types. I've had to learn to not isolate when I'm down, and that's the hard part. Absolutely. Katrina, it is, and if anyone can agree with this, please feel free to share if you agree. It can be easy to want to self-isolate when you're not feeling your best, when you're feeling sad or you're having some emotional issues or you're physically not feeling good sometimes. The desire to isolate is one of the symptoms of depression as well. And so learning to not isolate is a very resilient behavior an action to take is to purposely not isolate. Okay, I want you to continue, even if we're not going to answer here. I want you to think about how you love, how you enjoy helping other people and how what you enjoy about other types of support to give people, because often we give what we want, sort of like a love language too. And we're going to move on to our next slide. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to strengthen existing relationships. Do any of you have, a relationship that you feel like needs to be strengthened a little bit? So some ways to strengthen those relationships are to prioritize regular check-ins with people, especially loved ones, to be an active listener, to show genuine interest and empathy, express gratitude and appreciation often. It's so important for the people that support us to know that we feel their support. I'm going to read a little bit more. So we have Krista that says, I like to help where needed, but I have a hard time receiving. And thank you for sharing that, Krista. That's a good thing, a good awareness to know about yourself, because people that love you will want to help you and support you too. Sherry says, I agree. Barbara says, emotional and practical. My closest support is my daughter. I do have 2 friends who live a little further, but I speak to them weekly. It does help. And then Linda says, all 3 depending on who and what. And then Julie says, we luckily we tend to have ups and downs at different times. And sometimes they are my support, and other times that I'm their support. And so we'll talk a little bit about that too. It's sort of reciprocity and relationships. David said emotional. Katrina says yes. Krista says my sibling, we're 10 years apart. Kenneth says all areas, reaching out to encourage others through going through struggles. He's currently maybe reaching out to others going through struggles, strokes, cardiac, etc. Renee says, it makes me happy to help others. I do it daily. And then Julie says, I like to help when I can. So in order to strengthen relationships, expressing gratitude is really important, and appreciation, but also resolving conflicts with open communication. Relationships are really special, and they do take some nurturing and effort as well. Kenneth says learning to accept that help graciously is very difficult. And that is something that I think can be a theme for people. If you have a hard time accepting help, feel free to share in the chat. Just say, I do, and then we'll kind of know. And often people are comfortable giving, but receiving can be a challenge. But knowing that, so Sherry says, I do. So knowing that it's important to be able to work on strengthening your relationships, and all relationships need effort and in this area. So there's something about power within vulnerability in relationships. We'll move on to our next slide. And we're going to have another question. And before I do, Barbara says, I do because I feel like I'm being inconvenienced to others. And it's interesting how we can feel that way sometimes, but we'll actively help, but you might be feeling that way. And it's important to ask yourself, is that true, or is that a distortion that I'm assuming that I'm an inconvenience? So what strategies have you used or could you use to strengthen your relationships and deepen connections? So thinking about some of the things I just shared, or thinking about things that you've done, let's see some examples, or hear some examples of things that you've done to strengthen your connections. I will give us some examples. For my relationship with my husband, I think being purposeful to go out and work on our relationship, talk about things, I think always can help deepen the relationship. Understanding that we both have, we're both individual people and we have things going on, and talking about that. Also, I've been kind of going into really enjoying actually having pen pals this year, which has been a fun thing for me. And I'm starting to, while these are not deep connections, I'm starting to deepen them a little bit by having just more deep conversations, and really understanding, where people live and what their life is like. And it's really is forming like little bonds with people, which has been kind of fun. And then let's see if there's anything else. Okay. I don't have anybody else answering in, but thinking about what you do to strengthen your relationships. I do want to say that Julie, her example of like the group that goes out to dinners weekly, that may be something that would be very easy for some people, not easy for some, but that's an intentional effort to strengthen and keep a relationship going, really creating a lot of effort there. So thinking about what you can do to strengthen your relationships, and all relationships and supports can use strengthening, even support groups, thinking of what you can do to strengthen your relationship with the people in your support group. Katrina says, I try to reach out and check in when, even if it's just a text. That's a really great thing, and it's a very easy thing. I haven't done it here, but it wouldn't be against me to try. But if you're on your cell phone right now, I don't want you to do this, but I, in the past, for other presentations for a different group, that I've had people just pick up their phone and reach out to someone real quick and say, thinking of you. Someone that's been on their mind or has crossed their mind, because it's important to be able to make those connections. And often we get busy, we get distracted, and we are moving away from doing that. And so I encourage you to do that this evening. If you're not feeling comfortable doing it right now, don't do it right now. But pull out your phone some point this evening and just send someone a text to say thinking of you, or how have you been. Those little things can really help. I'm going to move on. I also like to send cards to people. That's another thing that I've been doing quite a bit lately. So we're going to talk a little bit about the power of vulnerability. And I want to applaud this group, because often you guys are pretty vulnerable, and you show up for yourselves and even for the other people here. But true connection allows is really happens when we allow ourselves to be seen and to be authentic. And also true connection and sharing kind of the challenges that you have, or the things that you've done that have helped, can deepen relationships and can form a trust. And that's where vulnerability is really important, because if we're going to share, we need to feel like we're going to be that we're in a safe space. And then, and really, it's important in our relationships that we do find those safe space for open expression. So it may be that you may find that some people, some of your social supports, depending on where they fall and what they do, are safer in some areas than other areas. It might be that, if something really big has happened to you, that, there might be a support over here that you'll go to for that, but maybe not over here, because you don't know this group quite as well. So I'm going to move on to our next slide. I'm going to see, I'm using my laptop, so I'm sorry, I feel like I'm very squinty today as I'm reading. Renee says, I realize how important it is to communicate. It always strengthens my relationships. Absolutely. And Julie, this is very sweet. Julie says she is thinking of everyone in the group, and I will second that. The other Julie says, my friend in Florida has been like a sister for 30 years. I speak with her daily and her husband. Sometimes it's medical questions, internet questions. All subjects are on the table. It's perfect. So, so as you can see, relationships take a lot of work, and we have to make effort towards them. Also, creating relationships where we can be vulnerable is really important, but then also relationships should have boundaries. And noting, and I know you guys know this as well as I know this, not all relationships are positive. Some may be draining and toxic, and those aren't healthy for you. If relationships are draining or toxic, they impact our mental wellness and our well-being in general. So learning to say no and protecting your energy is really essential for you, and it's essential for your mental well-being. How many of you have trouble saying no? You can just say yes. If you have trouble saying no, say yes, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay, Julie said yes, Krista said yes. I've gotten much better, but I used to be a yes girl until I learned the value of saying no. But it can cause a lot of distress if you're not comfortable with it. Sherry says yes. Barbara said yes, but I'm working on this year. Very good. And Joe says yes on the no. Thank you for the humor and understanding. And so it's important to set boundaries. So how do you set boundaries? Thinking about communicating, looking at relationships, what's healthy and what's not. And it's really important for strong social connections that your relationships are pretty healthy. And if you can provide boundaries, not allowing balance in your relationships and cultivating the relationships with the healthy people in your life versus setting boundaries with people that are unhealthy, you're going to overall be more balanced. So how many people on here, I talked about if you've had good, Nancy says, no problem to say no for me. That is awesome. There is power in saying no. And I love this. A long time ago, I shared it with someone. No is a complete sentence. You don't require to give an explanation. So Kenneth says healthy boundaries require no. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's move on to our next slide. And we're going to talk about how to expand your support network. And so I asked everyone, like, how many people have deep connections? How many of you feel like you need to support or need to expand your support network, that you need more people in there? I'm going to say me. That's what part of the pen pal thing is that I wanted to expand my connections, my support, my people, because a lot of to me, life can be kind of transient, and sometimes people come through and come out, and I wanted to have some more more connections as I'm getting into a different phase of my own life with my son getting older, etc. So Katrina says me, I do. Sherry says, Tina says, I have a MS friend who says no is a complete sentence. Yeah, it's a good thing. So if you're thinking about how to expand your social network, one thing I want to share is that it's possible. It can be overwhelming. It can be hard to kind of think about. Like how am I going to meet more people, and how do I strengthen connections, etc. But it takes effort, and it takes a little bit of effort. So one of the things you can do is to be proactive, reaching out and initiating connections. This is hard. You have to be brave to do this. And being brave sometimes looks like trying, and sometimes it's a good fit and people respond, and sometimes they don't. It's an interesting thing trying to make friends. Julie says, I've been reconnecting with college friends and roommates that live in the Detroit area. It's been fun laughing about our college days. So that's one of the strategies that she used, is looking back at people that she's interacted with in the past. There's also ways that you can join local community groups, hobby clubs, or volunteer organizations. So there's things that you might be able to do in your area. There's probably virtually things that you can do as well. Engage in shared interest activities to meet like-minded individuals. And I would like to ask, have any of you ever, what have you done to kind of stretch your circles a little bit? And so I've talked about this pen paling, that's stretching it a little bit. I also at other times have tried to join like volunteer organizations or volunteer for things, and that's helped a little bit. But it takes time to build those deeper connections, so those don't all transfer. Kenneth says to find healthy balance between what you're engaged with and what you're wanting to add. It's very, very, very good advice. So finding a healthy balance between what you're engaged with and what you're wanting to add. So if you were trying to expand your social network or your group, what would you do right now? I will, for me, I'd probably look into groups that interacted with hobbies that I liked, because I'm really into arts and crafts these days and painting. So I'd probably look for that. I'd probably look at like MS support groups, because that's an easy way to connect with some other people. Barbara says, I was more active and this could have contributed to this. Nancy says, 20 years with the same gym group. Gosh, 20 years, that's a long time. They do lunch once a week after a workout. That is great. So that's important to kind of think about. There's things that you can actively do. I've been trying to even think about this group. This is such a special group, and I wish that you guys had the capacity to have some connection beyond Jessica reading what you say. And who knows that, but I would love, how do you take that to the next level where people could know each other if they wanted to? Don't be scared if you don't want to know you don't want to release who you are on this because there's no plans or anything, but I just think about that. How do people, get to kind of foster that connection? So let's move on and talk a little bit about the role of technology now in social connection. And I just, I will, before we do that, we have another surprise question. Where do you think you could find new sources of social support, either locally or online? So that's this idea. Anne says, I do feel like I'm always the one initiating planning, and I get tired of being the only one. So I moved away to Maine. I'm now looking into social media and find child-free friends in the new area. That's really great, Anne. Thank you for sharing. And it's hard when you're the one that's kind of initiating and trying. You want other people to reciprocate with that. Katrina said, started going to a hobby on Saturday when I can. Casual connections, but it gets me out of the house. So that's like a surface level, but you'll never know if you may develop a friendship. I feel like one of my best friends does not have MS. And I met her because our children played baseball together when they were like 6 years old. And it's like it really, really grew into a very strong friendship. It really just kind of started by sitting on the bench, watching the baseball game, and then very casual, and then over, over 11 years later, here she's my best friend. So we're going to talk a little bit about the role of technology. So we'll move on, but you can still answer that if you want that question. So I want to say again, this mental wellness chat is such a good example of the role of technology in connection. But you guys also are talking a lot about your support groups in your area. I would like for you to mention if you attend an online support group, can you just say yes and what state? And that might be beneficial if someone else lives in that state, that they could, even if someone's watching the recording of this afterwards, that they could say, okay, oh, there's a support group in my state. That would be helpful. So Katrina says no, Barbara says no, Sherry says yes, Michigan, Julie says yes, Detroit area. So we got 2 for Michigan. Anne says yes in Massachusetts. And I'll let Tina says yes, Pennsylvania and Colorado. Perfect. You guys can keep on going with that. If you attend a support group online, just say yes and what state it's and that would Joe says my group is worldwide. Kenneth says right here. Thank you, Kenneth. Julie says in Downey, California. And then Tina says also New Jersey. And Bruce says, yes, there's a support group in Santa Clara, California. So social media and online platforms really have been able to help people foster meaningful emotions, especially when they're used intentionally. Like people coming and signing on to the MS Mental Wellness Chat. You guys blow me away. You really participate. And when you participate, it helps make it a meaningful connection for yourself and for the others in the group too, to not feel alone, to feel understood, etc. And there's all sorts of technologies. There's, video calls, there's messaging apps, and a virtual support group can make it easier to stay connected. One of the technologies I'll share, just because it's been something that has been really helpful for me this year, is that my best friend that I was telling you about, she went on an adventure with her family, and they went on the Intercoastal Waterway, and they've been on a boat, and they're almost back to North Carolina, but it's been a year. And I knew I would miss her a great deal because she's one of my closest friends. And I have learned to just embrace the power of FaceTiming her. And so instead of being able to see her, I would FaceTime her, and it's been such a great way to stay connected. Um, there also needs to be a balance of online and in person when you can. In person is, is helpful to have when it's possible, and I always encourage it. But do any of you use these technologies like FaceTime or video chatting on top of other things that you do just to connect? Do you use technology? And you can say yes. And we're going to move on, and I'll continue. So Barbara says yes. And if there's anything that's been really good for you in terms of like using, let me know. This is, a little bit deeper of a question, but what are some of the challenges that you've faced maintaining supportive relationships? So we have Julie says yes, Linda says yes, FaceTime. Katrina says no, phone calls or text. Nancy says Facebook, MS, step by step, advice and contest. The group is very interactive. Very good. I think that's the name of a group. So what are some challenges, if, and this is important to know, what are some challenges that you might have experienced in maintaining supportive relationships? Sometimes things in our past, can make it challenging to maintain supportive relationships. I always say working through that with therapy can be helpful. I think also some challenges can be, related to sometimes to physical disease and changes that you might have, and if that person is not a good person for that season of your life, then they may not be as supportive. David said yes. Here in North Carolina, there's support groups. Julie said that she's found a MS Zoom painting class, and her friend in Florida and I took the same class, so we did something together. That's awesome. Julie says she uses Wi-Fi. Tina says things can get out of context online when texting. That is true. So that can make it a little bit hard sometimes when we're doing things online. I think sometimes with building supportive relationships, sometimes it can be hard if you are the giver, and you need to be given to, if that makes sense. That can make it difficult. Sherry says, sometimes I say things before thinking about what I'm saying, awkward and hard. And then Katrina says, not a lot of energy left to give others. I think it's a challenge, physical and mental. So when you're struggling with energy, physical and mental, it might make it harder. Or if you've been hurt before, it can make it challenging too. If you are recovering from an emotional hurt. So we're going to move on to our next slide. And we're going to talk a little bit about groups. And this is important because finding your tribe is important. So it might not be in a support group format, but I think it's important to talk about. So Bruce said we need both online video and in-person meetings. Absolutely. I think that would be great for the mental wellness chat, but that would be so difficult. But yeah, we as people, we need online as well as in person. But I think the COVID kind of did help us in many ways by making things accessible and showing us that we could do things via online, and that would be good for us. So just, how do you discover more of your tribe? Finding local and online support groups. So why support groups matter. So we're going to move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So support groups are great because they can be a safe space to share experiences with, and with people who truly understand. And that's what, I think one of the things that makes a lot of the MS support groups very special, a lot of this mental wellness chat special, is because when you have something in common with someone who understands an aspect of it, doesn't have to understand everything of it, but an aspect of it, it can really make a very big difference. And so there's a lot of value. I always say that's like precious. It also reduces feelings of stigma and isolation. It is not uncommon sometimes to feel alone in your feelings, and support groups can help with that because it can help normalize what other people have experienced these feelings too, or I'm not alone. And also, you can be given, practical coping strategies and emotional encouragement, and those are priceless as well. Barbara said, yes, it makes it a lot more comfortable, or makes it more comfortable. So there's different types of support groups. We'll move on to our next slide. We'll talk about those. There's peer-led groups. There's there's professionally facilitated support groups. So that would be like, this group is technically professionally facilitated, but it's not a full-out support group. It can be a condition-specific group, so it can be really a group related to MS, to chronic disease, mental health, etc. And then there's also different like online and virtual communities. So how would you find a support group? Move on to the next slide. Check check the National MS Society, check MSU's and News to see what groups are out there for you. Check Facebook. I've heard a lot of Facebook about Facebook groups today. Ask your doctor. If you see a MS specialist, they may know about a local support group. Ask around. And also ask your healthcare provider or a counselor for recommendations. And we'll move on to the next slide. So exploring online support groups, you're thinking about like Facebook groups. There's groups on Reddit. I'm not much on Reddit, but also nonprofit organizations. Looking for a group that suits you. Support groups all have different cultures and different take on different personalities. So finding the right one for you. Also, there's websites like Meetup where they have meetup groups can be helpful for finding a group that has the same interests and hobbies. Like it might be painting or hiking, etc., or music, or a love of knitting, etc. There's a lot of different groups that you can find online. And then it's also, and as you're exploring, kind of just support, you can also consider, there's sometimes virtual support groups and platforms like within BetterHelp or Talkspace. So how do you find the right support group? I think it's important because they're all different personalities. If we can move on to the next slide. Consider the group size, the size. And in the meeting format, is it in person or is it online? What works for you? And ensure that it's positive and it's a non-judgmental environment. You need a safe space. And then looking for groups that align to your specific needs. For example, many years ago, I helped develop a support group for people that were minimally impacted by their MS, or at the time newly diagnosed even, but minimally impacted because that was a different need at that point for the area that I was living in. We have more comments. Sherry says no local support groups within 100 miles of me. That's a lot of miles. So definitely online is probably your closest. And then Bruce says, call the NMS, National MS Society navigators. They can be very helpful in helping to connect you with a group. I did not get all the message, Joe. Tina said, important to have a variety of types of support groups, not just MS groups. Absolutely, because we are a lot more than just MS. MS is a big part of us, but it is not all of us. And then Julie said, we're going to the MS Walk April 5th in Long Beach. So there are right now also the National MS Society is having some of the walks and events. So that might be another way of meeting other people. So we're going to move on to our next slide, and we're going to kind of just sort of put this all together. And sorry, we're going to go over one more. Oh, actually, stay there. So, and I'll say thank you to Bill because he's really good with me. He follows what I'm saying pretty good. So tips for engaging in a group. Attend consistently, and this is going to help you to build trust and relationships. I always say that we can't expect the experience that we've had just one time to be what will always be our experience. So it's always good to try things and give space to see if it's a good fit. Be open, not only to share what you're share, kind of your feelings you're comfortable with, whatever, to whatever level you're comfortable. And then respecting confidentiality and the group norms of the group. So we'll move on, and we're going to kind of put this all together because we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's move past that. We're going to move to the next slide. And one more. We're going to talk about overcoming some of the barriers to social connection. So social anxiety, past trauma, fear of rejection can kind of get in the way. It's important, if you have any of these barriers, to kind of think about implementing kind of small strategies to ease you into a social engagement. So if you're not a support group person, if you're not a group person, it will be hard to go to a group. And maybe for some people, going to a group is not the place for them. Maybe it's more one-on-one type activities. But starting small, kind of, one connection at a time, not allowing yourself to feel super overwhelmed by it, but allowing yourself to narrow in a little bit more. Also, being an active support in your community. We'll move on to the next slide. Support goes both ways. So being there for others can actually strengthen bonds too. And when you're volunteering or doing acts of kindness, that fosters connection. I feel like one of the best things to do is to volunteer or to help somebody or to cheer somebody up, because definitely by doing that, you foster connection. And then small gestures like a text, a shared meal, a telephone call, those little things make a big deal. Think about the last time you either got a card in the mail, a text of someone just checking on you, someone sending you a picture on Facebook or whatever, a small little thing, and that it made a big difference. But when you're actively practicing being supportive in your community, that helps to deepen that too. We'll move on to the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about the loneliness epidemic. How can we change it? Loneliness continues to be a public health concern, and our society, people as a whole, feel way more positive and connected and better and healthier when we're connected. Thinking about how we can, create more inclusive, supportive communities. Thinking about that for yourself and your networks that you're with. But it's important to talk about loneliness, because loneliness is something that many people deal with. And how can you take an action to help with loneliness? And then we've talked a little bit today about the active things that you might be able to do to help with loneliness if you're dealing with it. So for building your support system, let's talk about creating an action plan. Reflect on your current support system. Who do you turn to? Set goals maybe for deepening some of your existing relationships and identifying new ways to expand your circle. We'll move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of our closing thoughts. Social support, again, is a mental superpower. And social support is a part of living well with MS and social connections. And when we can prioritize our relationship, this can lead to greater resilience and overall emotional health. And knowing that connection is a two-way street, we have to give and we have to receive support. So we're going to move 2 slides over, Bill. And there's strength and connection. What is one thing that you're going to take away from today's program? Thank you, Nancy. Kenneth says, if you can find a friend, then be a friend to someone else. Linda says, deepening my connections with Facebook groups. And I want you guys to know that each of you, we all show up to this mental wellness chat, no matter, where we are and how we are in the moment. But I'm so thankful that everyone is on here, and know that even if it feels like, today's not your day, you're doing a great job by just even being here. Katrina says text a friend for a get together and make a plan, not just talk about it. Very good. So again, thank you to Beatrice for their support of tonight's mental wellness chat. We are indebted and so thankful for all the support that they have given the mental wellness chat for the past couple of years. That's been incredible, and we are so thankful. And again, thank you to MS Views and News for being the catalyst to help start this program for people. Not goodbye, but see you later. I will be here next month. I am looking forward to seeing you. Remember that you are part of the community. You are not alone. Social connections are important. You are being resilient by being on here tonight. So just even letting yourself know that that you're doing great things by being on here and on this call tonight. And I will see you next month. And until then, keep thriving.